X-Men is one of the few franchises that I would call creatively perfect. Absolutely not because everything in it is perfect, god no. But its initial premise and themes lend itself to be endlessly adapted. You can have an X-Men story work in almost any circumstance. It has all the pieces there already. But how can I say that without having read any X-Men comic over its 60+ year history? Well, I can't, that's what the video is for. Unlike some of the other heroes in the series though, I do have a pretty deep relationship with these movies.
Is this fucking play about us?
And while I can definitely make a video on that later if you'd be interested, I bring that up now because I feel like I don't really need to be sold on X-Men. I'm kind of ready for that X-Men comic main course. I want to experience the holes that only watching the movies have created in my Zoomer brain. I want to read the foundation that enabled these movies to even exist in the first place. And the general consensus for that is to read Chris Claremont's God Loves, Man Kills. We start off right in the middle of the action with a group called the Purifiers, whose sole mission is to kill every mutant imaginable, and we see what lengths they'll go to when they murk these couple of kids. They hang them on a swing, and specifically my American viewers might already be drawing comparisons to lynch mobs. Now, in my last video, I spoke about creative complaints I had related to the way early Spider-Man pushed its philosophy, and that garnered a lot more debate than I anticipated. So much so that I'm eventually going to release a compilation with a lot more thoughts, since I don't really think I came across exactly how I intended to. But X-Men at its core is about prejudice, and especially in the context of this graphic novel, it needs to be talked about. If you think that you can understand this comic without bringing up the myriad of social issues, many of which are pretty hot button even today, you're wrong. You're just incorrect. And creators do have a right to insert their beliefs into their work. But when I talk about this, it's not just I disagreed with Ditko's politics and I agree with Claremont's, therefore this is better. It's that this is genuinely done way better. To wrap up this non sequitur, there are pieces of media with messages that I disagree with, often pretty wholeheartedly so, but I'm still able to enjoy them, and likewise, ones with messages that I love or resonate with, but I thought were unremarkable. The reason I say this now is because we are about to meet the man who commands the Purifiers. He's hateful, he's genocidal, he's pretty batshit crazy, it's William Stryker. And he's very evangelically Christian. I do understand why they stripped this in X2, although I am sad because it is very creatively saucy. But Claremont, a man of faith himself, does a really good job of showing that Stryker is an extremist, and I didn't really get the vibe that it's a jab at organized religion in general. Now, I am not Christian, so I can't say this filled me with any particular emotion, but at the very least it's a really cool way to show a poignant topic that's kind of head and shoulders ahead of any comic I've addressed on the channel, and that's pretty cool. Really, all of the social commentary ages pretty timelessly, with one notable exception, the N-word. In later editions of the graphic novel, the N-word is retroactively censored, and I'm pretty genuinely conflicted on the matter. On one hand, it's a rare misstep of the core theme. Kitty here is called a mutie, which is kind of an in-universe slur for mutants, and Stevie here is like, they're just words, so she retorts that what if Stevie was called the N-word, and these are just not really well compared. Kitty is not only genetically or phenotypically, I don't know what the word would be, but she's white basically, and she can also pass as a human. The discrimination she faces is just not the same as Stevie's, and I think when you lose a little of that abstract concept, it dulls the overall blade as a result. Even more awkward is Stevie afterward is like, yeah, Kitty's right, they are the same. But on the other hand, in a powerful scene, in an expressly adult story with confrontational social commentary, it's kind of insulting to just censor it. And don't you dare say oh, well, kids could be reading. 2 kids just got fucking lynched the page before. I really do appreciate though that I can have these feelings because the underlying structure is just so well executed. None of these food for thought sequences would come to be without just absolutely stellar writing. It is very early 80s, so you'll be spending a good amount of time on each page though. Brent Eric Anderson, though the artist, didn't impress me quite as much. I really think this retro style needs pretty top tier art. It's still solid, but nothing that blew me out of the water. Likewise, I wasn't as impressed by the action. The main value of a story like this is the story. I'm not saying this is like a big deal, but there's really only one truly captivating sequence in the novel, and it's about the same length as Daredevil Love and War, but took me a lot longer to read. I'd say this is probably the max length for a story like this one. It's kind of like the polar opposite of Spawn. Pretty much all of the points from now on will be about the core story, since that's 99% of why you should read this. The 1% is the panel design. This packs a lot of panels per page. It's pretty unique. It's very clear to me that Claremont is just an X-Men veteran. He just makes really good creative decisions, like putting Professor X on ice to free up time for characters like Kitty Pryde, who I didn't really know about before this, and now I'm really excited to read more of her. Aside from Magneto, all of the mutants are pretty non-violent, but it works well because it makes Stryker's forces a lot more menacing. And speaking of Magneto, I am biased because he's probably one of my favorite characters in fiction. I just fucking love him, but he's really the only mutant who will really fight these guys, and it amplifies his perspective very powerfully. Now, I do have another complaint, but I want to get across beforehand that virtually no other comic that I've read has been interesting enough for me to talk about in this way. These issues are only enabled by these really awesome character dynamics. They made Stryker too evil. Again, this is super opinion territory here, but I think having Stryker as a 100% evil monster devalues the moral ambiguity of the theme. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying hate is morally great, especially in this series, but making Stryker like Hitler, I think distances himself from the hate he's supposed to be a metaphor for. He murders his wife, his infant child, and of course, unfortunately, in our real world, there is hate like him, but I think the novel would be a lot more powerful if they made a much more comparable villain to everyday hate. Maybe like a mutant accidentally killed his wife, or he only has interacted with Magneto's philosophy for mutants and it radicalized him. I don't know, but I just can't let this story make him this simply evil. It's too good for that. The silver lining of this, though, is it makes Magneto so cool. This man just has so much aura. Because this story is so adult, it unfortunately makes the few dumb ideas stand out a lot more. Like, we get fake out deaths for Charles, Storm, and Cyclops, which is like 1 per 20 pages, and none of them are particularly convincing. I will say though, Professor X's arc is so cool. I'm not going to spoil it, but it gets really weird. The last act though is where shit goes down. It's the best paced, it's the best drawn, it's the best writing, and this is just like, this is grown-up writing right here. It has Stryker doing this big rally at Madison Square Garden, and I may have over-bitched about Stryker because he just steals every scene he is in. He is such a great villain. He's just so sinister. I was gonna make a joke about comparing him to Mike Pence, but like, this guy is just on a whole nother level. I'm gonna bump that 1% to 5% because the art when Cyclops ricochets his beam to free Charles is so swaggy. Also, it's the soy jack meme. If anybody who is mad at me for the Ditko video is watching this one, I just want to say this is how to do police perfectly in a superhero story. And yeah, the epilogue is a little bit preachy, but the wholesome ending is one I can vibe with. Not every adult media needs to end all sad and depressing. Get you a comic about hate that you can smile at the end of. So I got the Epic Collection, and there's a lot more to this volume, but I have learned my lesson, and as soon as I read that Professor X had transferred his mind into a newly cloned body, I knew I needed to skip this batch until I had more context. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's the video. It's just gonna be a little bit shorter today, and I'm not. We're gonna be doing a quick bonus round with X-Men Days of Future Past. And first of all, what a cover showing all the mutants who are already dead. It's like, okay, let me sit up and lock the fuck in. So one of the value points that I hope my videos bring is for new readers like myself looking what to purchase to get into a character. And I realized by skipping a lot in the Epic Collection, but also skipping a lot in this collection, kind of diminishes that. So if you are confused, drop me a comment. Basically, you can't go wrong with getting either of these, but just get God Loves Man Kills without the Epic Collection. Now, unlike God Loves Man Kills, it's just 2 issues in Claremont's run, which is pretty cool. I gotta say, I really like John Byrne's art. It's very similar to the movie. Mutants are being driven to extinction, go back in time, stop the inciting incident type of shit. In the movie, I do understand why they send Wolverine, because he's Hugh Jackman, but Kitty/Catherine does a really solid job here as the primary protagonist. Although they do sometimes refer to her as my kitten, which I just cannot read without thinking of Discord. The pacing at first is really good, but the second half doesn't do a lot to justify its length. I can't even begin to understand the lore implications of this panel in particular. The writing, again, is very solid. Claremont has a lot to explain to me, but I only felt a little lost, which is pretty impressive. I would say it's a fine premise with mostly solid execution. I wouldn't say that there were aspects that absolutely floored me, but there's also no glaring flaw. The thing though is the action in a vacuum is not bad. Like it's pretty solid action, but it's way too long. It's like 60 or even 70% of the story is just fights, and it is kind of boring. Although major sauce points for not showing us the future when Kitty saves the present. I think that's a really cool way of doing an open ending. If you like this video, I think you'd really like my other Reading My First Blank comic, which I do have a playlist for, and I'll link it in the top right. Next time, I'm coming back to DC with something a little bit different, so really excited to show y'all that, and if you don't want to miss it, come on board and subscribe. Oh, and you already know that you friends are how I choose which topics to make my videos about, so if you have another hero or story you want me to look for with my brain rot takes, let me know. I try to read every single comment. Days of Future Past is just 2 issues, and I kind of don't want to rate it because of that, but I have rated comparable length stories, so I guess like a 4. It's a solid time, but I can't really sell you to read it for any reason in particular. God Loves, Man Kills, however, is much easier to love, and it did its job. I'm ready to read more X-Men. The story, the writing are just fantastic, but I can't say that the art, action, or overall thrill match that level. It's a respectively strong 7 out of 10. Till next time, peace.